But what kind of things can't HDMI do that's important?
Well, I think the main thing that HDMI can't do is very quickly turn the TV on because HDMI CEC is so thinly supported across the years and differently supported across TVs. And so if you want to make a TV that's smarter and able to like show you the weather and then disappear, do stuff a little bit more quickly, because you're going to have other things plugged into other HDMI channels, and because CEC is like fundamentally unreliable, it needs to be more tightly integrated into the TV to make that sort of integrate with your smart home work. So if you want to turn a TV into like an Echo Show or a Google Home, that's really difficult to do if you just have a stick plugged into it, because it's gonna feel crappy and slow.
Unless the TV is on all the time, which maybe with OLED is less of an issue.
Yeah,
right.
My TV, I've got a NVIDIA Shield hooked up to it, and then a Nintendo Switch, and like it is not uncommon for it to suddenly decide that I'm playing a game on the Switch in the middle of a movie, and just like flip over to that and be like, "Hey, you're probably playing a game now." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. It's not time for that," or vice versa. And like the Shield will just power on because it gets a signal from the TV. It's like a weird two-way highway that doesn't work very well.
Well, and some of these devices are too clever by half. So I set up a Fire Stick in like HDMI 4 or something, and then realized that HDMI 4 didn't fully support HDR. Okay, fine. So then I unplugged it from HDMI 4 and replaced it in my Roku and HDMI 2, and everything was great, and it was 4K. And then as soon as I asked Alexa something, it switched it to HDMI 4, because when it ran through its initial setup, it identified itself as being on HDMI 4. Which is like, then I'd like go through the whole thing again.
I keep thinking like you just, I mean, I want the dumbest possible TV. I'm going to have, a separate receiver, and there's going to be one cable going from the receiver to the TV. The receiver does all the magic. But that seems to be like the TV manufacturers are all so afraid of being disintermediated that they're doing everything they can to prevent that.
Yeah. And they can't sell those TVs at a profit.
Right, yeah, without all the tracking software on them. So if they sell a dumb TV, it would have to be ironically more expensive than a smart TV.
There's got to be an opportunity for a service to dumbify TVs, like to
show up with like a whole bunch of like powerful radios and magnets to just like fry the particular part of the TV you want to fry.
Like a DVWRT that just pseudo bricks TVs and just turns them into the dumbest possible device.
Maybe like you get the TV and you pull the MAC address, and then you just immediately program your router to block that MAC address.
Yeah. Or you could sell like RF blocking like sheets, like little steel tinfoil hats.
The tinfoil hat for your television. This is amazing. Well, I think we should get started. Welcome to this week's Repair Radio. I'm your host, Kyle.
And I am the teardown engineer, Taylor.
And we also have remotely, we've got Kevin out in Buffalo, New York.
Hello.
And your special guest, Bohn from the Verge.
Greetings, mobile accomplishers. So
super excited to be talking. This has just been such a jam-packed week in the tech world. I am blown away by... I have never seen a product launch go this way. I mean, this seems like the most roller coaster of a product launch. I mean, Dieter, can you recall anything? I mean, what's been like a catastrophic demo failure like the Galaxy Fold has been?
Man, I am trying to think what has actually been yanked in the like review stage of a thing, and I am coming up super blank. We've had products like announced and pulled, so I'm a Palm guy, so I still remember the Palm Folio, where they thought they were going to create a little laptop companion for your Trio phone, and then they finally realized that they shouldn't do that, and so they pulled that product. But a device like just straight up being broken for reviewers and subsequently delayed is like not a thing that we ever see.
Well, it's interesting because we talk about repairability a lot and the durability, and we get people thinking about what happens if inevitably something breaks. But that doesn't normally enter the discussion of mainstream product reviews. You're reviewing a thing; it always works. You're just reviewing the capabilities. You're not generally able to talk about the durability of something because you've got it for such a short window.
Yeah, and it's very early, and often with these things, like they're always something that we get from the company, we borrow and then we have to send back. So like just from an ethical perspective, we want to break it. And sometimes like from a legal perspective, we, in order to get the review, you sign a thing saying, I'm not going to intentionally, break this thing. I'm not going to chuck it against the wall or do a drop test or, whatever. My plan is from now on though, to insert a clause into all of those contracts for review units to give myself permission to put every single device in a bag of Doritos and shake it. Or to pour Doritos onto the keyboard and see if it still works.
Right. Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So for those listeners who have not been following the entire drama, Dieter, can you give us kind of like the abbreviated version of what happened when you got the review unit from Samsung?
Sure. So the unit was fine, and I was, going through my review. Everything was very normal. And I had been planning on saying things like, although the screen seems like it could be delicate and picks up dings, the hinge mechanism itself feels very sturdy, and on and on and on. And then, so I received the unit Monday. I believe it was Tuesday night. I noticed this weird bulge on the bottom of the screen right in the crease. I was like, well, this seems bad. I felt it a little bit. It felt like it was something hard, like a piece of sand underneath there. Call up Samsung, say, this seems bad. They're like, well, we're going to come and replace it tomorrow. Okay, cool. Get into the office early, take some photos, get some video of it, and then just like wait for Samsung to comment, wait for Samsung to come in and replace the unit. And while I was waiting, thinking I was the only one with a problem, I see some tweets from, let's see, Steve Kovac from CNBC, Mark Gurman from Bloomberg, Marquez Brownlee, I'm forgetting somebody else here, all just start tweeting like, my screen's broken too. So I'm like, oh, okay, fine. This is a problem. Hit publish. And then over the course of the next couple of days, it becomes clear that there's two big problems. Problem number one, there's this thing that looks like a screen protector that you shouldn't pull off because it destroys it. And then problem number two, the much more mysterious, like bulge problem, which I experienced, a reporter for a German magazine experienced, and then finally Michael Fisher, Mr. Mobile on YouTube, just posted, I think, a day or two ago that he was experiencing it as well.
Swiss publication, by the way.
Swiss, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I did that too.
So I'm curious, as you were using it, did you notice that there was a gap kind of along the hinge underneath the screen where things could have gotten in?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw it. You look at the thing and you can just see the gap. Now I think there's basically two types of gaps that are worth us talking about. The one on the front is the one that I noticed. Like there's that, plastic rail that holds the screen down, and then the rail doesn't go across the hinge, so you can kind of see a gap there. That's the one I was worried about. The one that didn't occur to me to worry about was
teardown. Pull up the teardown on iFixit, and you'll see. And I've got on the video here a photo of us putting a guitar pick right in underneath that fold where it would be very easy for material to get underneath it.
Yeah. And I mean, I assumed that's where mine had gotten in, or it seemed likely, although it was weird because the bulge that I got was, I don't know, half an inch or so north of where that gap was. So it would have had to like silently worked its way in. The other gap is, of course, the gap on the back on the spine, which I thought was like, it's fine. But when you're teardown, you guys really educated me. They're like, actually, no, if you look at that gap, that is massive, especially in the context of a smartphone.
You can also jam a guitar pick into that. That's our metric for everything on this. It's like, how many guitar picks can you fit into your phone? And the answer should be 0. You should be able to fit 0 guitar picks into the innards of your phone. However, with this device, not the case.
Well, so Taylor, you did the teardown itself, and I've got it up here, and we're going through. Give me kind of your initial impressions of this thing.
Well, initially, we were actually, as we started doing the teardown, we were a little impressed because it started coming apart more easily than some of the older Samsung phones, like the S10s that we just took apart.
Right, the screen just came, a little bit of heat, and the outside screen came right up. Yeah,
normally it takes an aggressive amount of heat, and this time it just kind of took a little spritz from the heat gun, and then it came right off. So that was impressive, but then as we started getting further and further into the device, we just were overwhelmed at how many like fragile pieces there were. And you can tell that Samsung did a lot of work to make certain parts of this phone robust, but I just think that they underestimated the fragility of the screen, to be honest.
Well, although I mean the entire hinge design, everything like it seems like everything about the mechanical structure of the phone is designed to protect the OLED.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, designed to protect the OLED, I think might be a little bit of a stretch, but designed to last, I think, is maybe a fair thing to say. Like, if you look at the hinge, it is actually incredibly robust looking. And I think my favorite part about the hinge is there are three main parts to the hinge, and the center part of the hinge is where the like the gear mechanism is.
Right. This is fascinating.
Yeah. So the upper and lower parts of the hinge are floating. So if you watch the video on our teardown, you can see that in the video, the top part of the like the upper hinge kind of floats, and that allows for horizontal, like, or not horizontal, but torsion flex. So if the device is to occur any twisting, then it will be able to, the hinge will be able to take that. So that just makes me think they were really designing to make this thing durable, and the screen is just the weak part, you know.
Almost
Yeah.
Greek mythically, by folding the phone using their wonderful hinge, you are in some ways, what some have speculated is that you are essentially then pushing the particles that got in through the hinge up into the OLED screen.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you are almost, it is, it is its flaw and its greatest success that the hinge is so cool, but it also is so reliable at pushing debris into the OLED screen, which then fails in a way that most OLED screens do, as according to our engineers, which is like catastrophically. It doesn't just die a little bit. It doesn't kill a pixel. It doesn't just leave an area of your screen, looking worse. It generally, the whole thing goes down because, OLED screens are sensitive to everything, to cut it short.
Yeah. And so this was the thing that I have such a hard time actually just writing about it and describing the hinge, because it is so, like, I want to use the word robust. Like, if there's any twist when you open it, it accounts for that. It makes sure both sides are always, opening evenly relative to each other. But what I don't understand is, if you look at the inside of the hinge, it seems like they should have just covered over where some of those gears appear so that they wouldn't be able to push grit into the screen. Like, why don't they just put, like, I don't know, a piece of film over that or something? Or
sure.
why isn't there a piece of film over the gap on the front of the phone? It's like, fundamentally, like, they did such a good job, like, accounting for, like, mechanical failure. They never thought to deal with the failure of things that exist in the world, like sand and grit and potentially clay. Even it may have been molding clay on our device, although I still don't think so.
Do you think this is just classic? Like, it was designed in a lab in a clean room and they just forgot about the real world?
Honestly, that's my inclination. Like, there are just too many indicators that they did put a lot of thought into it for me to say, like, they're just dumb. I think that they were just not planning for the right use cases, or planning in a lab.
Or just maybe rush the very end of it.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, the addition of the screen protector feels like maybe that was a last minute decision.
Yeah, and like we say, we call it screen protector. What we mean is the top layer that some of the reviewers peeled off. Notably, Peter did not pull his off. Let's just.
Well, I did ask, though, because it looks like you want to peel it off, and it collects, like whenever you've got like a screen protector, it sort of collects dust
around the edge.
But then the screen protector lines up with that plastic rail that holds the screen down, and it just collects dust like nobody's business. And so you are like, just like, you feel like you want to get rid of that thing or clean it off all the time.
Well, and we're just completely befuddled, because it would have been really easy for it to be a little bit bigger and go underneath the bezel, and that's just part of the screen. And the bezels are relatively easy to remove.
That was another really interesting thing, was the bezels came off incredibly easy, like almost as easy. The top layer of the screen does not come off easily per se. It's pretty strongly adhered, but I would say the bezels maybe came off easier than that top layer of the screen did.
So why is the screen protector, the top layer, not extend all the way to the edge? And the only explanation I come up with is it was a late addition.
Yeah, a last minute addition. I mean, another theory that I had was maybe Samsung knew that the screen would be I mean, it's plastic instead of glass, so it's going to pick up dings and nicks, as the Verge's review showed. So maybe they intended to be able to replace that top layer at some point. You know, like you spend $2,000 on your phone and you don't want to replace the whole display. Oh, Samsung can just replace the top layer for $50, whatever.
But I mean, what do you think the actual mechanics of replacing that top layer would be? Like they would have to have like a really special squeegee with the stuff to dissolve the adhesive to get that thing off. Otherwise, like that screen is so delicate underneath that protective layer that I would think any kind of force on it is a huge risk.
Yes.
What I think what gives me hope about that idea is, I can't remember who it was, but somebody who peeled off the screen protector in their review, or with their review unit, their screen survived for like a day or two.
And so maybe it was something else that killed it, and not
Yeah.
removing the
So
screen protector?
no, I still do think that what kills the display when you take off the protector is the pressure that you're applying to the display.
To wedge your finger in between the protector and the screen.
But just the fact that that one person was able to do it without breaking the screen immediately makes me think that Samsung must have a way to do it, you know, with heat or some kind of chemical solution.
Yeah. but it's hard to envision what it is, and the training. So what go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe this is what you were about to ask, but like all these things that point at kind of a rushed delivery or a, you know, not quite thought out lifetime for this device. Like, why is it so important that this Fold got out the door and to reviewers? Like, why would a company prioritize getting a device like this into the hands of reviewers and to the public, you know, versus the more normalized approach of thinking it through and testing it more?
I mean, I have some ideas, some theories. Number one, and I think this might have been the biggest pressure, is Huawei has one of these folding phones in the works, and that folds the other way. And there's many fascinating things about that. But the amount of like corporate pressure on Samsung coming from Huawei's direction is as big or greater than whatever pressure they feel from Apple, because Samsung has done not very well in China, and Huawei is making really strong pushes across Europe and you know, other like APAC and everywhere else. And so they're eating into Samsung's bottom line. So getting this thing out the door lets Samsung plant like an innovation flag that says, we look at this thing, we made this thing, we're selling this thing, and we're amazing. And that's fine, I guess, that they needed to get it out first. The thing that I don't understand is the positioning of it. If they had called this thing a developer beta or a, you know, extremely limited edition, you know, super fancy, you know, Ferrari edition, you know, go partner with, like, literally pick any luxury brand you can think of and say, this is the Hermes, and we'll have a mass market one later, but this one is only for certain people. And they could have kept the price exactly the same, or even cranked it up a little bit. And I think that a lot of people would have a really different attitude towards a, you know, very special, fancy, limited edition thing that's fragile versus something that was meant to just be a mass market thing.
I totally agree. And that, I think everybody, Samsung all the way through, would agree that in retrospect, that's how it should have been framed. It's just such a fascinating thing. I'm curious because, you know, the fragility of this thing all of a sudden brings the discussion around repairability a bit to the forefront. Because even if they do perfect these issues, these initial issues, clearly it's going to be dramatically less durable than past phones are. What do you think the role is as a gadget reviewer of thinking about the life cycle of these things as you're making recommendations?
Well, I think for this device in particular, this form factor, you've already got a weird, thick, awkward, bulky phone, right? Like when you fold this thing half, it's doofy. It's got like the gap in the middle of the hinge. It's you know, it's like, it's a big thing and it feels weird. And so if you're not trying to fight on the level of I'm making the thinnest, sleekest, sexiest, you know, fully enclosed, you know, slab of a smartphone, if you're not having that fight like they do with the Galaxy S10, then if you make it a little bit more repairable and that, you know, you end up having to make a trade-off that there's like a little bit of extra added bulk or, you know, whatever that trade-off is that people traditionally cite as a reason that they don't make something more repairable, I think that kind of goes away because you've already got like a brand new form factor that's awkward to begin with. So, you know, make it a little bit thicker, make that rail, a little bit, it's already easy to take off, but like make that rail come off easily, and then make the screen come off of that from that end really easily, so you don't have to dig through the back of the phone to do anything. Like that seems like a totally reasonable thing to do.
It's fascinating to see as we shift toward. I mean, it seems clear OLED is the technology that is going to win the future, and yet it is dramatically more fragile than LEDs were or are.
And as I'm learning this week, Samsung itself is the major supplier of OLEDs around the world, and so this company does not have a ton of incentive to provide low-cost replacement OLEDs to anybody, their own customers included.
Yeah, one thing I'm not sure if you're aware, but the repair market is having a real hard time with OLEDs because the parts just aren't out there. There aren't aftermarket factories making these things like there are with LEDs,
and they're much harder to refurbish because, as we said previously, they're generally dead when they're dead. It's harder to get usable parts out of them than there were for LCD displays, for instance.
Do you guys think that that's an issue of them being really tricky to manufacture and just too new, or is it like is there some monopoly problem, or is it fundamental to the idea of OLED that there's never going to be a lot of factories that make it because it costs too much to make?
Well, I've got about 1,000 words. That's way late to Kyle for this. So,
but it's a combination of new technology, patents, expensive to set up. But all of that was true for LEDs for a long time too, and eventually the aftermarket catches up. So there's you have your traditional technology adoption curve, and as we're at the beginning of it, it is monopolized. Really, it's only Samsung and LG that can do it.
It may be harder for third parties and refurbishers to get secondhand parts out of OLED displays, again because of not only the repairability, but like as has been an issue, burn-in, which affects any device that any OLED device that's been around for a while. It's harder to rescue those without some kind of burn-in showing. And then also just the Asian market dynamics, which are the way it's looking right now is that companies in Japan and China are ramping up their OLED production facilities, and so Samsung may or may not be the kind of king of the market for who knows how much longer. So hopefully, we'll see more OLED options for people repairing and stuff. But right now, they're pretty much the market mover.
Which is, it's interesting if you go into a repair shop and you want to get your S9 fixed compared to an iPhone 8, pretty much the prices for parts are so expensive that the repair shops just aren't doing it.
Yeah, an iPhone 8 is about like $70 if you walk in right now to a unnamed chain repair shop and say like, hey, I need this, versus that same shop is $270 for an S10 or an iPhone. And Apple charges about $280, $290 for an iPhone X, I think, which also has a Samsung OLED display in it. iPhone 10. I'm sorry.
What we're hearing is that Samsung just like they're really enjoying the fat margins on the parts. and so they're just consistently propping the prices up higher, which I think leads us into some of the right to repair discussion. Is like if they are the monopoly on the parts, to what extent are they gouging people, and is that enforceable potentially?
Well, I mean, I guess I could imagine a world where it is, but that's a difficult world to imagine because we're talking about cooperating on that enforcement across multiple countries, right? And I mean, I have no idea how I would even begin to fight that fight with Samsung.
Well, they lost on the DRAM fight back in the day.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah,
it's happened.
Yeah.
Dieter, can I ask you a question and perhaps shift this to let's say something nice territory? Okay. So I would say the kicker or the nut graph of your actual review. The Verge has many pieces about the Galaxy Fold, as much they have to. But your actual review, the canonical review, says right before it jumps into the details, I've never used a device with this many problems that I have liked this much.
Yep.
Please expound.
When Samsung actually released the very first Note, everyone just laughed at it, and then it became a smash hit success because people just wanted a bigger screen. And I caught myself in that category of initial doubters. Having a little miniature tablet, like a 7-inch tablet, with you at all times is great. Having that larger screen gives you affordances and abilities and just an overall feel of using a thing that is superior to a phone in like 15 different ways. And just like if you just consider the thing as a little Android tablet, if they had just made this thing with that and it didn't fold in half, and they, I don't know, maybe make it a little bit thinner or whatever, I would have seriously considered buying it. I mean, as long as they kept the price like under $500, because it's really convenient, and it's, you look at the iPad mini, and it's that people adore that device. They deeply love it. And of course it's more capable than Android on a small device anyway. But there's a reason that people enjoy that screen size and that sort of experience, is because it really does fit in a particular corner of your life that a phone doesn't, or a larger tablet doesn't. The other reason I really liked it, and this is a little bit harder for me to pin down, is because it's so awkward. It has like the little phone experience, which you don't want to use. And then it has the large tablet experience, which you want to use, but you don't want to use everywhere. And that sort of middle zone where you're in line at the grocery store or on the subway, or even like walking down the street when, you shouldn't be using your phone, where it's really easy to just pull your phone out and do something. This actually discourages that, because the little screen is not enjoyable and the big screen is a little bit too big and awkward to use in those situations. And so even though I use this thing a ton, I used it in a way differently than I use a phone. On my phone, it's, me pulling out and checking Twitter all the time. This thing, I like use it in meetings instead of my laptop. So I felt better about this as a gadget in my life than I expected to. And in some ways I like it better than having a phone.
And maybe that's one of the great problems with tablets, even an iPad mini. You like it, but if you want to take it with you, you kind of need a bag for it.
Yeah.
Right.
So the fact that this fits into your pocket, a tablet that fits into your pocket, maybe that's the...
I mean, that's the dream. One of the things that I wish that they had done, and we could actually talk about this a little bit, because you confirmed something for me in your teardown, is if you look at it, it folds out like a book, right? And when it's folded, it's very tall and skinny. And that means the screen on the front is very tall and skinny. Well, in my head, what I would like them to do is have it fold out the other way. So when it folds, it's a little bit wider, and then, it unfolds basically the same size. So basically switch it from portrait to landscape in the way that it unfolds. But my hunch is they probably tried that, and they probably didn't think it worked, because they probably couldn't get the screen controller in the right place, because the screen controller on this thing is on the right-hand side. And so it has to, refresh the screen across, the short side of the 7 inches. If it had to refresh the screen across the long side of the 7 inches, it might have been a bigger problem.
That's interesting. I think also from a rugged durability perspective, I really do think durability was in their thought process from the beginning with this.
Yeah.
I think they just didn't think about this failure mode, and the over-designed hinge and the floating metal back panel that the screen is mounted on, and the way that the screen, like when you open it, the geared system makes sure that it opens synchronously in both directions. All that is designed to mitigate stress on the screen, and I think they were probably able to get there's just with the hinge area being longer, they were able to provide more support on the screen than if it was levered out more.
Right.
Yeah,
that makes
sense.
With wider wings. Yeah.
So why do y'all think that they didn't try harder to seal this thing up against debris and dust? So it doesn't have an IP rating explicitly, but there are just a bunch of like gaps right next to moving parts, which to me seems like a recipe for disaster. And I think it turned out to be.
I kind of just feel like it was a losing battle, and they admitted that right from the get-go. Just thinking about how I would add IP resistance to this device, it feels like a nightmare. And so I can only imagine like being at the drawing board, trying to figure out how to build the hinge and what to back the screen with, and then also adding to that conversation how to make it ingress resistant. Like it just seems like it would have been really difficult. And I'm not saying that it's like that is a fair thing for them to omit, but I can just imagine it being so daunting that they decided to not even try.
Yeah.
I just imagine like a Ziploc bag type piece of plastic that's just lining the entire inside of the phone, and every time you fold it, you just hear this like paper, bag of chips crinkling sound, and you're like, well, at least it's waterproof.
Yeah. I tend to want to give these designers a fair amount of credit, because they spend so many years work. There's so many people with so much intent and effort for years working on this, that I don't think you can simply say, oh, they didn't think about it. They have to have considered it and deprioritized it for some reason.
Yeah. So I guess I'm interviewing you now, which is hilarious. My last question is, they have said they're still gonna release it. It's just a delay. It's not a cancellation. There was a quote that they gave that to me indicated that they might like actually tweak the design of this thing in some way. I have to imagine there's tens or, I don't know, maybe 100,000 of these things that came off a factory line that they're going to want to try and retrofit in some way. But maybe not. If they go back to the drawing board, that's like a year, right? At least. So what could they possibly do to this thing to better protect the screen?
What do you think, Taylor? What would you do? And I mean, as you think about this, like the amount of money involved, let's say it was 50,000 of these, and we're talking about on the order of, I mean, depending on what their margins are, right, $70 to $100 million sitting there in a warehouse waiting to get out there.
Right?
Can they add more? I'm going to use the word wrong. Can they just like bolster the substrate underneath the OLED panel? Just like create a super like thick, durable, like none clay shall ruin this display. like can they build the north wall inside this thing between the OLED and the back? So it's like, go ahead, dirt, do your worst.
I think that would be too much work. Like I think that would require
a redesign.
Yeah, a redesign that would take a year or more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
you can't just like pull the panels off, modify them, and sink them back in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily an expert in that field, but I don't think you could.
Okay.
But I mean, some kind of baffling or gasketing around the edge.
Yeah, I think what we will definitely see is a change to maybe that top layer of the display. And what I'm hoping to see is, so right now the bezel of the main screen that I mentioned comes off fairly easily. That comes off in two pieces. And I think what they could do is take those off, because that, I mean, is super easy. They could do that very easily.
Yeah.
Take those off and then try and make that into one piece and have it connected by some, I don't know, rubber gasket that would
stretchy material.
Yeah, that would fold, but also cover that gap on the display side.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would save everything, but I do think it would be enough for them to come back and say, look, we tried to do something. It's still fragile, but buy it, please.
Dieter, if you get one back on mid-June, whenever they actually deliver it, what will you be looking for when you get it back?
Well, hopefully I'll get permission for the bag of Doritos test.
Sure. Good.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, I'm not going to set out to break the thing, right? I didn't set out to break the first one. So it's unless I go out and buy my own, for me to like go at it with like real durability testing is difficult. And we might decide we want to spend the money to do that. But if nothing else, I'll be looking for, just from my untrained eye, do I think they did enough to protect ingress on this thing? And hopefully also I'll spend quite a bit of time with it to just see if anything happens.
I think that's reasonable. I think we will be watching The Verge carefully, and I think everybody should be probably following you on Twitter to see kind of the ongoing drama with Samsung. Is there anything you want to promote? I know you gotta run, but is there anything you're working on you want to let everybody know about?
I think the main thing is keep an eye on The Verge for an announcement about the Vergecast related to Google I/O. Just a tiny little tease right there.
The little teaser. We're excited about Google I/O. We got something going on for that too.
Oh,
so
cool.
Stay tuned. Fantastic. Well, I know you've got something to get to, so thank you so much for joining us.
It was really fun. I hope to do it again soon.
Okay, awesome.
All right, thanks, guys.
What a fascinating device, and what a fascinating journey to
Absolutely.
go. I mean, it was, this is like 60 miles an hour to a screeching halt. I have never seen a product launch killed by the product reviewers. Yeah. Right. This is like a video game coming out and they seed it to the initial reviewers and then they're like, oh shit, we made a bad game. We need to go back. We're just going to delay the launch. We're going to retool things and we'll launch the game in 6 months.
Not even they made a bad game, but the reviewers like can't make it past the first level without.
Yeah, even Bethesda sticks to their games and says like, listen, this is Fallout 76, guys. Like, you enjoy West Virginia like we designed it. Can I ask you guys, as the new guy here, a question about our own teardown? So I guess when I read it, and I was left wondering because the score of the Fold, which we haven't mentioned, is like a 2 out of 10, or maybe we mentioned that. I don't know. We're here saying this thing is going to be a nightmare to repair yourself, repair techs, anybody. But I'm not sure where we landed on like the hinge, because on the one hand we have spent a lot of time extolling the virtues of this amazing hinge, and it does seem super cool and like a feat of engineering that like outdoes a lot of bikes I've torn apart. Like internal geared hubs are not this complicated, but at the same time, it sounded like our teardown and our institutional voices saying like moving parts equals potential problems. Like even such a well-designed hinge is a potential problem for any human being who's not a robot who's going to fold this thing.
But laptop hinges work so well.
Yeah, true.
Right.
But laptop hinges.
Wait, no,
are
wait.
generally
Some of them
designed-
do.
Some of them.
Some of them do.
So what do you think this is possible? If we say Samsung goes away for a year or two and they redesign this, do you think they have another crack at this and this is all solvable?
To be honest, I'm glad you brought up the score, Kevin. We are constantly walking a tightrope of talking about straight up repairability, as in like how easy is it to replace the display, and how likely is it that you will need to replace the display. And those are arguably two different things, but we try and bring both of them into our repairability score as often as possible because they're both kind of relevant. So this particular device, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you have to constantly replace something that is also slightly annoying to replace, like
exactly
right, you're also more likely to damage it by all the times you have to. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So this particular device is, I wouldn't say significantly, but is noticeably easier to replace certain things on than, for example, the S10, which just barely came out. And the S10 got a 3. So this is a lower scored device than the S10. And there are just so many ways that you can come at this conversation. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to like convey to the reader and the industry what we think about the device's construction, I guess.
It's a very fragile device. It's very easy to break, and it's going to be really hard to fix.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bottom line of the score. And so as a result, and I mean, as is usual, and has been the case for Samsung devices for a long time, we don't recommend people buy them.
Yeah.
I would say on the repairability score, if it scores lower than a 5, don't anticipate that it's going to be straightforward to fix. Expect it's going to be expensive, and buyer beware.
Yeah, and as we said, we have no idea what the prices are going to be yet on a replacement screen for this thing. The thing that seems most likely to break, and it's probably not going to be cheap at all.
But yeah, given that those S10 displays are already $200, and this is twice the size and also much more complex.
Right. A replacement screen that's less than $600 for something like this would be surprising to see, and maybe more. And then can you even install it without breaking the new screen in the process without specialized machinery? It would be challenging. Yeah, I mean, I understand the compelling, the idea that we would want a tablet in our pocket, but we're certainly a long way away from the Star Wars Flexi that you just folded up and put it in your pocket. And it's durable. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to make a gorgeous screen that's flexible, and there's so much circuitry in there. That circuitry is very fragile, and you make it so thin to make it flexible. And here we are. Well, that was your Galaxy Fold discussion. We could talk about this thing for a long time because it's just one of the more interesting stories in tech. But Definitely. Some of the other things that are happening, there's a whole lot of right to repair news happening, and I want to loop everybody in. And Kevin has been diving in. We have the Federal Trade Commission has announced an inquiry into obstacles to repair. They're really curious to see what's going on. Right. Kevin, how's your investigation of that going?
Good. We've been writing a lot of stuff on the iFixit blog about everything that basically we took everything that the FTC is looking to get from consumers, repair shops, anybody, and they ask a number of pointed questions about, how does this affect this, and how are people affected, and we are trying our best to kind of actually address a lot of those points at the blog. So we've been writing about things like the biggest obstacles to repair, things that companies do to block either independent people or individuals from independent shops or individuals from repairing. And as alluded to, I am working on another post about Samsung in particular and the pricing of, say, their repair screens. So we're trying to answer as many questions as we can, and we actually will be submitting those to the FTC, along with what we hope is some data and other stories from other people. But yeah, along with the FTC hearing, which the deadline is Tuesday, I believe, April 22nd.
It's Tuesday, yeah. So
not
they are
22nd.
open to the public. They want your input. So if you can share your experience with repair obstacle, they definitely want to hear it. They have a series of questions that they've posted on their website. You can Google for "nixing the fix," and it will pull up the FTC
Yes.
site, and then
Very Googleable term.
And then they have a reasonably convenient form. So unlike the Copyright Office where they made the form as complicated as possible to fill out, this is a pretty reasonable. And then, and they say, was this published? But really, I mean, you can just paste in and paste in your note. Tell them your story. I think they want to hear your repair stories.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I've tried to keep myself from going down too many rabbit holes about various kinds of repairs and markets and things like that. But in the meantime, the FTC, the deadline is Tuesday for that hearing. That's in July, I think, June. And in the meantime, though, in various states around the country, there are things afoot, bills moving and or being discussed. And Kyle is just back from Salem, Oregon, I believe.
Yeah, we had a hearing in Salem last week, which was this week. I was there on Monday.
It's a fast moving week.
It's a fast moving week. Yeah. So this was cool. Oregon is a little bit interesting. They declined to move the bill forward this year. So we knew going into the hearing that we didn't have a chance at a vote on right to repair, but it was an informational hearing where the legislators wanted to ask about it. And we had a fantastic coalition of people show up. We had folks from the OSPIRG, which is the public interest research group, where they were working on protecting consumer interests. Oregon has the Citizens Utility Board, or Oregon CUB, which is a group are fighting on behalf of citizens and making sure people have access to the internet in rural areas. They were very active, and then we also had just this coalition of local nonprofits and repair businesses show up. So if you've never heard of Free Geek, they're absolutely amazing. We should have them on as a guest on the show sometime. Free Geek is an open source collective in Portland where they recycle e-waste, but then they reuse and repair as much as they can, and then they make technology available to disadvantaged folks. And one of the things I love about Free Geek is if you want to learn about technology, you can go and volunteer. They'll train you how to build PCs. And then if you volunteer for 20 hours, the last PC that you build, you get to take home for free in exchange for volunteering.
That's way cool.
It's super cool. So they are bridging the digital divide more effectively than I would say just about any other organization that I know.
Yeah, and having humans at the end of the chain instead of a robot, we're big fans of.
Yeah.
Right. It turns out humans can, add intelligence. I mean, they do a lot of, you've got some older Windows PC that Windows isn't running fast on anymore. Throw Ubuntu on it. It'll run fast.
Or Chrome, or some version of Chrome OS, or anything
Chrome
really.
OS.
Yeah,
absolutely. And they teach classes. So if you're in the Oregon, Portland area, I highly recommend you swing in to buy Free Geek. They have a thrift store where you can go and buy electronics, and you will not get a better deal on older Macs or accessories.
And then
while I was in there, I bought some extra AC adapters for the office.
They're valuable. They are worth their weight. And then also things are shaking in Sacramento, or already did.
Yes.
Or?
So California is next up. So as we're working through, we got 21 states that have introduced right to repair this year. California is next up. So we have a hearing in Sacramento on April 30th at 1:30 p.m. in the Consumer and Privacy Protection Committee. So if you're in the Sacramento area, please swing by. You're welcome to join us. I'll be there along with our California coalition, which includes, I think, Consumer Reports will be there, which will be super cool. The Electronic Frontier Foundation is sending someone. And I would, this is a opportunity. So if you're listening and you're in California, please go to california.repair.org and write your legislators right now. We have a possibility of getting a floor vote on right to repair, but Apple and the appliance manufacturers and everybody else is fighting us really hard. So this is the time. If there was ever a time to call your rep in California, this is the time before the hearing on Tuesday.
Yeah, and then I believe things are then midway through the country, just gaining so many miles for you this month. Minnesota, right?
Minnesota also is looking. We've made it out of 2 committees in Minnesota this year, which is the farthest we've ever gotten, and it looks like we're going to have a floor vote in the capital of Minnesota this month, maybe next week, which will be super exciting. So same thing goes for Minnesota. Minnesota.repair.org. If you know anyone in Minnesota, you got any Minnesotan family members, now's the time to speak up. And we'll have this as the wave of right to repair moves across the country, there will be other states, but we have a really good shot in both California and Minnesota right now.
It's also a great time to, as I've learned from following it, it's also a great time to learn more about state legislation and how it happens.
Yeah, and
you can learn a lot from this.
Right, it's really not that complicated. They want to hear from you. So have you called your rep yet, Taylor?
I certainly have.
But I mean, they're friendly. Usually there's a staffer they pick up. They say, hey, what are you calling about? You say, I'm interested in supporting the right to repair bill. They may ask you what the bill numbers are. And then they just have a sheet and they just keep tallies. And you're welcome to email them, but a phone call is probably worth 10 emails. And I mean, this is their job. The politicians are there to listen to and respond to their constituents. And clearly this is something that impacts people's lives. So you have an opportunity to engage in democracy. It is not as corrupt as you think.
What if you're in one of the states that hasn't been mentioned recently, like New York?
New York. Yeah. So we will there. It's interesting how the legislative calendar is different for different states. So New York absolutely has a right to repair bill. It's going to happen. It's just going to be later this year. Same thing for Massachusetts and a number of other states. But that doesn't mean you can't reach out to your rep right now and talk to them. So we have set up all 50 states. You can go to yourstate.repair.org, so newyork.repair.org or massachusetts.repair.org, and we have a handy form. You don't even have to know who your state reps are, who your senator or rep is. You just write a little letter, and then we figure it out for you and send it to them.
So just because you don't have an inkling that something is like currently about to hit the floor, you can make waves and contact your representatives in your own state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a few calls make a difference. If we could get, you take New York, if we could get 10 phone calls to every state senator in New York, that would move the needle.
It's a lot of them, though.
It doesn't take a lot. No, there's 100, right? It's totally doable.
Gotcha.
So that's the right to repair news. It's been a lot of kind of groundwork to get to this point, but to have kind of really compelling shots in 1 week at Oregon and Minnesota and California is really phenomenal. And everybody that's been involved behind the scenes has just been working like mad to prepare for these things. So if we could get some help from the community and get some kind of last minute groundswell support, that will amplify our message when we're in the Capitol testifying.
All right.
What else? What's coming up next on the teardown docket? Do we have anything? I mean, it feels like this is a little bit of a lull after the Galaxy Fold.
Yeah, the Galaxy Fold was so huge. Honestly, the next thing that I'm most excited about is Huawei's folding phone, the Mate X.
Yeah.
I have so many questions about that. I am most curious about. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, for those who are listening and maybe don't have a chance to look it up, it literally folds the opposite mentality of the Galaxy Fold. Instead of folding in to a closed device that then has metal on the outside, it folds the way that you shouldn't fold a book back around, and then there's screens on the outside on both sides.
And so you just imagine how fragile is that screen going to be? Like if you have it in your pocket with keys, will the keys kill it?
Yeah.
So I can see why you're excited about getting that
It
monster
seems like maybe
in.
it should have some like hard shell, like eyeglasses case that slides into.
Yeah.
And then you would never want to put in your pocket unless it was in the hard case.
We've all been waiting for that 19-pound phone with a clear acrylic display case that we carry around with us. Exciting.
There are just so many variables that, I mean, I'm hoping that it won't just be a carbon copy of Samsung's phone, just reversed, But having the display fold the opposite way, like you mentioned, makes it more vulnerable to things in your pocket. Or, I mean, how do you even set a phone like that down without scratching the screen in some way? But I'm hoping that they can use that opposite fold mechanic to back the screen up in a better way. Like because there's a bigger radius on the curve of the screen, they have more room to back it with something solid instead of
make it a little bit more
Samsung had
robust.
to leave like a whole gap between the metal panels,
I feel like Huawei right now is like everybody else during the Note 9 debacle. where they're like, oh shit, we better ingress protect this thing, right?
Yeah.
And I know after the Note 9 battery thing, every major manufacturer went back and retooled their battery safety.
Yeah.
Oh,
We have to make sure this never happens again.
Here's the Note 7.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Note 7. Yes.
I'm reminded every time I get on an airplane, it was the Note 7.
It was the Note 7, yeah.
Yeah.
And so Samsung is sort of bearing the brunt of forward progress for everybody else, and that's a bit of a result of their philosophy, right? They always
they want to be first, and I think that's pretty cool about Samsung. And I hope that they take that they take all of this salt that everybody's giving them with a grain of salt,
And so you imagine, I mean, Huawei's got to be, just really getting ready. Who's making out like a bandit with all this is Apple, who's just sitting on the sideline and laughing at everybody,
waiting for everyone else to figure it out.
Yes, Apple, who has to pay Samsung $110 for every iPhone 10 screen.
Yeah. But imagine, what was everybody talking about before the Galaxy Fold came out? We were all talking about MacBook keyboards, right? And all of a sudden, nobody's talking about MacBook keyboards anymore. Everybody's talking about the Galaxy Fold.
I didn't even think about
that. Your belief is that human beings as a species can only hold one company in contempt at a time. Like there's one memory slot for like, who do I currently dislike?
Failure. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. That's a reasonable theory.
This is an entertaining world. We always say, may you live in interesting times. Well, here we are with gadgets that fail before you get them.
Yeah.
Did you see that they changed their keyboard repair policy? So they pushed out a new policy so that all keyboard repairs are done in the store rather than sending them out to their repair facility.
And they said 1 to 3 hours, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, well, the thing is, you're swapping the entire uppercase of the computer, so it's not. I mean, the repair doesn't fundamentally take that long. You just end up with, you're swapping out a third of the computer. I mean, you got to take the main board out. So I would say, how long do you think for a skilled technician who's done it before to do that swap?
I think you can do it in an hour. Apple has everything set up so neatly. I'm sure that they have a place for every single part for their repair technicians, so I'm sure they can do it quickly.
But that's an hour complicated repair that you have to take the time to do right, while the Apple stores are already completely backlogged with iPhone batteries and everything else. And that's that's why they were sending them out to depots before, is because Apple just doesn't have enough staff to do all these repairs. So yes, they're doing it, and if you can get an appointment, great. But then you get, they're putting the exact same keyboard back on. So if you had the problem, there's no reason that the new keyboards are going to be any better. They'll fail again in 6 months.
Yeah.
If you're going to insist on getting one of these new MacBooks, you kind of have to buy Apple Care. As much as I would like you to buy parts from iFixit, Apple Care is going to be the better deal. And as long, Apple seems to be losing money on all of these machines that get repaired at least once or twice, because of the design, right? The keyboard is integrated into the upper case and the trackpad, and the battery is attached. So it's not just swapping out the keyboard; it's swapping out a very expensive, substantial component.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're not going back on these switches for these keys. They can't now. They can't go backwards. They can't put headphone jacks back in. They can't, they can't change their mind about how keyboards work.
They clearly need to. I think they have to know. But the lead time, let's say that they decided January 1st that they're going to finally redesign the keyboard. It's going to take 1.5 to 2 years for that to hit the market. So this is, it's very, I think we tend to we're moving at the pace of the internet and things are so fast, but hardware design cycles take years.
Yeah.
And if they had not, now the argument is they've had years to fix the MacBook keyboard. I think they just had their head stuck in the sand and said they were going to stick with the same design. Well, so the other news, this is just we're moving back through the last few days. The major news is it was Earth Day on the 22nd.
Was
leading up to Earth Day. Apple issued their annual environmental report, which actually had some things that were interesting in there.
Yes. I can't believe that was only Thursday. It's that was, So in the run up to Earth Day, I guess it was Thursday, I think, that they put out their announcement, or maybe a little earlier than that last week. Apple announced essentially the headline news that they would like you to pay attention to is that they've expanded the recycling program, is how they put it. That means that the things they said were that you can now drop off your iPhone at Best Buy and select places in the Netherlands, and that will seemingly send your iPhone toward the recycling robot Daisy, which they seem to have two of them, at least one in the Netherlands, one here, maybe a third is on the way. But just to hit all the headlines real quick before we circle back, they also announced, which we're big proponents of, and you can read the post about it on our blog, that they're going to make steps toward recycling all the cobalt that's in their lithium-ion batteries back into the supply chain. So essentially creating what they say is a closed loop, not audited, but be nice to see that actually. But basically a closed loop of cobalt, reducing the need to mine more cobalt out of the earth. And you can read our post. You can look up the Washington Post's really astounding reporting on how cobalt is mined. And
right, cobalt. Most of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a lot of it is mined in really kind of horrific, informal conditions where people are literally digging holes in the ground, and then without safety procedures, without equipment. The Washington Post expose, a kind of investigative piece, was just devastating to see the human costs that our gadgets are inflicting.
Yeah. And companies can say, oh, we've audited our supply chain and we're sure that none of this is coming from kids or from artisanal mines, was how they phrase those, holes in the ground. And it's very hard to track it all because of the Byzantine ways that the supply gets out through these holding companies and international brokers and stuff like that. So anything, as Kyle, I think, was quoted saying, anything to reduce the amount of cobalt being mined is a good move. So, that's good to hear.
Now, to be clear, Apple by no means is saying that all iPhones or all products that they're using have recycled cobalt. What they're saying is that the very small fraction of their products that they get back, the batteries they get out of those, they are sending to a smelter who is then recovering the cobalt, and they're buying that cobalt from them. So some very, very tiny fraction of the cobalt going into these devices is a closed loop, which is not substantially meaningful right now, but over time, if they could expand it, maybe it will be.
Yes, if they can get more of their iPhones. Well, no, kind of. Just before I forget it, the other thing they announced is that they're opening a recycling laboratory, essentially. And every recycling person we talked to for this story, quoted or not, said like, "Yep, that's a laboratory. It's a small, 9,000 square feet is a huge home for us, but it's a very small recycling facility where they're going to work on things involving e-waste and things like that. And they say that they'll share any findings from that lab, which will have their engineers present, back to the larger recycling community, which is good. Anything they can do to help figure out ways to extract more usable things out of electronics is good.
Yeah,
but
this really feels like a response to our criticism of Daisy, where I call Daisy, Daisy the death bot, where Daisy is this very complicated, expensive, multi-million-dollar machine that is designed just to take one thing apart, which is fine in Apple's sort of closed system, but it doesn't help what the world of electronics recycling, everybody that already has industrial processes that are operating at scale, that are recycling thousands of different kinds of product every day. The Daisy approach isn't viable. So it seems like this is Apple saying, okay, maybe you were right. We're going to see if we can start a lab and start some experimentation, see if we can come up with some processes that would improve how recycling is actually done, and share some of those best practices with the community.
Yes, but at the same time, they are still all in on Daisy. The
it
robot.
Sure seems like it. Yeah,
they are buying more of them. They say they expanded it. They said that it can now handle 20 models of phones, which 15. They weren't 15. I'm sorry. Yeah, they didn't specify which models that means. So does that mean?
I get the impression that's the 32 gig and the 64 gig.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because 15 doesn't go as far when you realize the number of SKUs they have.
The white phone, the black phone, the pink. You very quickly get to 15.
Yeah, rose gold. What a monster.
Right. Daisy still cannot do an iMac or an iPhone 4 or an iPad.
I think, which is your larger point, which is like we can't just build factory-sized robots for every device that every manufacturer makes.
This is why we have shredders that are general-purpose machines. It's historically not been viable to get all products back to single place. You can understand why manufacturers would say this. They're like, hey, we have this amazing assembly line process that works really well for making these things, and we make 300 million phones a year that way. It works really well. Let's recycle them the same way. It's just the real world is messy. Those 300 million phones get distributed around the world, and getting them all back into a single location where you have a fancy, expensive machine to undo the manufacturing.
Right.
While it's possible to make that machine, it's not possible to get all those phones back.
And as also stated in the piece and argued, is that, in terms of recycling, you're so unlikely to just quote unquote recycle your iPhone. Now, it's great that they'll take it back at the Apple Store and eventually recycle it or whatnot. But like the chances that even with your iPhone 5, you can't just get 20, 40, $50 for it and, hand it down the chain. Why would you recycle something that's worth some money? I mean, Apple offers a pretty token amount, I believe, in the Apple Store if you trade in an old phone. You can usually get more for it on the secondary market, which is good. Like that's a net good for everybody. But so overall, the number of phones that Apple is getting in to recycle with this robot is not substantial. It can't be, given the numbers that they're posting up. But it's not a bad thing. It's a very complicated.
Absolutely,
very complicated announcement.
You want to root for success. You want it to work. I mean, one of the things that they talk about the theoretical capacity where DayZ could process 200 phones an hour, but they didn't talk about how many phones that DayZ had actually recycled.
Yeah,
it sounds like they've collected something like 1 million phones that are queued up and waiting for DayZ. And so I think at the point that DayZ is running and is processing those 1 million phones, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, I wonder, like, okay, if DayZ can process an iPhone 6 and you're going to why would you recycle an iPhone 6?
Yeah, at this point, you wouldn't. Like Kevin was saying, you'd be better off selling it on the secondary market.
Even for parts.
Even for parts, yeah, busted. So a functional iPhone 6 is $100 right now on Swappa. I think a non-functional, water damage, broken screen will probably still go for $40.
Yeah.
The raw commodity value, we did the math, and the cobalt value inside an iPhone is about 23 cents. The rest of the commodities might add up to $1. Just saying, I'm going to take this $40 thing and I'm going to shred it and get $1 value out of it. And it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, right. So we wrote about that. You can read that at the blog. You can see what a nuanced reaction we have to what seems like a good news announcement. But it would be the same for any other company, really. Any other company that came out with a robot that recycles one type of phone or whatnot. It's good that Apple has the cash on hand, the resources, the expertise to try some new things, and
then
honestly,
we're talking about it, right? I mean, recycling doesn't get covered in the mainstream enough, so we're really excited to see people talking about it.
Yeah,
we're engineers. We're going to criticize the approach from an engineering perspective, but we're really excited that there are more brains thinking about it.
Yeah, someone who works in large scale, e-waste and IT. Refurbishment said, actually, good luck to them. Honestly, their lab where they're going to work on recycling problems, anything they can tell us about, new processes or things like that, can't be bad. But also, nobody should come out with the idea that the industry has just been sitting around waiting for someone in a black turtleneck to tell them how to recycle things. It's obviously a industry that's been, has some R&D behind it, has some movement going on. So
right. Yeah, that's it. Well, we're continuing to break more stories. I mean, just this week, between the Galaxy Fold teardown and which were, I think, congrats to the team. Taylor and friends did a fantastic job. It's just such a fascinating device. And all the way over to the progress that's happening on right to repair, and then tearing down Apple's analysis, and analyzing Apple's new environmental programs. It's just an exciting time to be in this business. So thank you all for listening and sticking through us with an hour of fast-paced discussion. We will be back in 2 weeks with more Repair Radio. Thanks for listening, and please, if you want us to continue doing this, the best thing you can do is leave us a review on your favorite podcast app store. Podcast store, and
subscribe if you want on YouTube or on in your podcast catcher of choice.
That's it. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Happy fixing.